thank you to the Minister for a very broad-ranging speech, which I thought was very helpful. I refer to one of the points which he anchored his speech on, which is about foreign policy beginning at home and the importance of a cohesive and united society in Singapore. I subscribe to those points. And I think perhaps it's best to describe it through something which happened some years ago. Minister gave me a call. It pertained to, it doesn't matter which country it is, it doesn't matter which race or ministry it is, but basically which embassy it is. A particular embassy had reached out to Singaporean MPs of a particular race and had invited them for an event. And Minister shared with me that at least the PAP's position was they will not be going for this event because of the particular way it was organized, only for one particular race of MPs to show up. And it didn't take long, in fact, hardly a few seconds for me to just tell the Minister, look, I think that's something we will follow suit because we are Singapore. And I think there's something quite pregnant when I say that, when I say we are Singapore. And I think I want to share this episode because just to set the tone of the conversation in the right spirit. 2 points which Minister raised. One was self-defense. And I think I have no disagreement with the Minister about how important it is for Singapore to retain our right to self-defense. The only issue in the case of the Israel-Hamas conflict was that conflict had a history. I don't mean a long history, but I mean a far shorter history. 4 conflicts in a short period of about 2 decades, less than 2 decades. And almost every time, it is a case of one side going too far. And this was what I sought to share in my speech in November when Mr. Vikram Nair and his colleagues filed a motion on the subject. The second element, which I think is important to talk about, and I think Minister made the nuance actually very well in his speech when he talked about the events of October the 7th. Certainly, they are acts of terror. The only issue, sir, is language shapes narrative. And in a conflict that is critical insofar as shaping minds and shaping the information landscape. And when you have a situation where one party is likely to dehumanize another party, which they have done in the past, its senior leadership, people in government continue to do so. The language that is used is important. And I recall Minister in November being very careful, and he said, notice I'm just referring to what happened on that day. And I think that's important. Those are the points I think that I feel compelled to share with the Minister, notwithstanding my broad agreement with what he has shared today. But I have 2 questions that I think can be helpful in terms of the public conversation and in terms of engagement with Singaporeans on foreign policy. One, Minister, again on the Israel-Hamas issue, I think, I've received those emails. I'm sure the Ministry has received those emails. People, Singaporeans, I think some of them are Singaporeans. I can't speak for every email that comes through. But there was a view that we should cut relations with Israel. That's a separate question, but I think it'll be helpful to understand the nuance of how foreign policy is determined when you have a situation where one party, for example, does not believe in the two-state solution, and that's our national position. And I think the current Israeli leadership does not believe in the two-state solution. I think they've said so publicly. I think a few of their ministers have said so publicly, notwithstanding motion, I think, that was passed in the Israeli parliament last week. So it'll be helpful to understand how we traverse, how we move on a foreign policy issue when we take a particular position and one of the other parties take a diametrically different position.
Mr. Singh, I will appreciate if you keep it short.
I'm done.
Because
Thank you for your indulgence, Chair. This was also a similar question that came up, I think, in activities on the ground, and Minister again may have experienced it where, and he spoke about it in his speech, where in so far as the Russia-Ukraine conflict is concerned, individuals asking why do we go so far as to sanction when we can actually make our point by saying we disagree because this goes against international law. So I think some understanding for the public about how we move vis-a-vis our own position would be helpful. I'm not putting these questions to suggest that I disagree with the position of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on these matters, but I think that understanding is something that can move the conversation in public forward. Because as the Minister has also shared, a lot of people in Singapore are talking about it for various reasons.
Minister Vivian Balakrishnan.
Let me start by, first I will thank you for your cooperation in the past. I mean, you've revealed a private and sensitive conversation that we had. I'm not going to go through the details, but I do want to affirm that yes, I do have private and sensitive conversations with the opposition. And I would also affirm that to date, you have been, in fact, we've arrived at consensus. We've arrived at agreement, specifically for that particular issue, but I would also say, I think as a matter of habit, we've been able to make sure our politics stops at the water's edge, and for that, I thank you. The next thing, since a lot of your questions have been about the problems in Gaza, I am going to start, and I welcome you to correct me if I'm wrong, by listing where we agree. I think I've heard you say you agree that what happened on October the 7th was an act of terror. You have also affirmed that there is a right of self-defense. You have highlighted the danger of words used or misused or used without sufficient thought or caution, and you've also highlighted the dangers of dehumanizing someone whom you don't agree with. And on this, I can say I agree with you on those points. Specifically for your question on diplomatic ties, and I think we both received the same emails, I detect in your question, actually, I suspect you actually agree with me that we should not sever diplomatic ties. Because even when the government of the day of another country may have a quite fundamental disagreement with us on policy. So I'm saying I detect that actually you are agreeing with us. Can I just, Mrs. Chairman, can I just seek confirmation that you agree with us?
Mr. Singh.
So short of recharacterizing how I put my question, which I had thought through carefully, indeed, my query on diplomatic ties, I'd rather be in communication with a party rather than not be in communication with the party. Okay. But the point, I think, was about how you respond when the other party actually takes a diametrically different position from your national position.
Minister?
Chairman, I will interpret that as actually you agree.
You don't need to interpret it, I agree.
Okay, thank you. So actually, on policy and on action and position, I think the Workers' Party agrees with the position that we've taken. But your question, to be fair, is please share what's your thinking behind. Because the Workers' Party and the PAP can arrive at the same decision, but for completely different reasons and a different rationale. So I think it's a fair question to see what are your principal considerations and how do you arrive at a decision like this? Well, specifically for diplomatic ties, and I stand ready to be corrected by Prime Minister, I don't think we have ever broken ties in 59 years, or at least in the 20 years that you've been around. I will get my staff to check, But I cannot recall a single moment when we have broken ties. So that's just a matter of fact-checking. But again, to the question, from time to time, will we have disagreements, even standoffs, even close to kinetic action with other countries? And the answer is yes. And will a performative gesture of formally breaking ties, would that necessarily be helpful? So that would be my first question. I'll ask myself, and I'll ask my staff, and I'll ask my Prime Minister. Do we want to go through this performative gesture, and will it help? My own inclination is to say, in times of tension, in times of divergence, in times of conflict, actually the more you can engage and communicate and keep multiple channels of communication open, the better. So that's my first point. To add on examples to that, in the case of Russia and Ukraine, we have not broken ties with Russia. Again, without spilling state secrets, have I continued to meet informally my counterpart in Russia? Yes, I've continued to meet informally. I've told my Prime Minister I've had to inhale secondhand smoke, and I've drunk good whiskey for the sake of Singapore. And why do I do that? Because I'm not engaged in performative gestures. I want to hear, I want to understand. At the same time, I want to communicate to him and to his country so they know why we take a different position from them. And it's not personal, it's not bilateral. And even when we go as far as to levy sanctions, these are targeted sanctions. We say we will make sure that Singapore is not a portal for arms or dual-use equipment which can be used against Ukrainians and Ukrainian civilians. And I can say that our relations with Russia, the Russians have had to say certain things about us, but in fact, if you observe the acts and the actions and the conduct between Russia and Singapore, it has been mutually respectful, it has been constructive, and I look forward to the day when the war in Ukraine ends and relations and the conduct of business can get back to normal. So now coming to Israel, I think it has been a rare privilege that our diplomats and ministers have access to all the countries, literally all the countries in the Middle East, even and especially during this time of crisis. And we don't agree with everything that every counterpart in Israel and the Arab countries state, but they listen to us, they respect our positions, they work with us to deliver assistance. And mind you, even for the delivery of humanitarian assistance, we will need to work with Israel. And the fact that everyone knows we do have good relations with Israel also gives us a special ability to contribute and to be more effective in the delivery of humanitarian assistance. So that's basically my thinking, right? There will be disagreements from time to time. That's normal. Having more channels open in general is good. Do you have to take sometimes actions to signify your disapproval? You do. But even in your choice of actions and diplomatic gestures, be very restrained, be very careful. And then focus on outcomes. In this case, Singapore has no say in what will happen between Israel and Palestine. But we have an opinion for what it is worth. And both the Israelis and the Palestinians know our position is not identical with each of them, but they know why we take the positions that we take, and that has not stopped us from having mutually respectful and constructive relations. And I think that's a good, I don't take it for granted. When I share notes, even with my counterparts in ASEAN and other countries, very few people have had access that we have had. We've been to Jerusalem, literally every capital. And when we went to Jerusalem, and Prime Minister will recall, the way in which both the Israelis, the Jordanians, the administrators of Al-Haram, Al-Sharif, the way they treated us and access that they gave us, PM will agree, it was unprecedented. I do not take that for granted. I think we had that because we have conducted foreign policy in a principled, consistent, respectful, and constructive way for decades. And that gives us access, that gives us some relevance, but never, never overestimate our weight. We remain small, remote, multiracial. The purpose of most of my speech today actually was not about the technicalities of foreign policy. Actually is to reflect that our very foundation and our identity is based on diversity. And it is our identity, it is our strength, but also understand that with that strength comes portals of vulnerabilities. And what we're trying to achieve here is not peace in the Middle East, but for us, all Singaporeans, we're able to say we may have different opinions, deeply held for a variety of reasons, but it will not divide us. And we will still make common cause, and we will still be constructive partners with our friends across conflict zones. Whether that conflict is in Myanmar, which is a civil war, between neighbors like Ukraine and Russia, who also have a complicated history, or between the interminable rounds of violence in the Middle East. The fact that Singapore is, has access, has respect, and has a small and constructive role to play is something which we should be grateful for. But my main point today, so long as we stay united, so long as we're able to respect, truly respect diverse opinions, and still operate as a united whole. And for that, I thank the leader and I thank the members of the opposition and the NMPs for what I believe today is consensus on foreign policy.